maybe you're a little befuddled by the wording of this subject that we have and what we are supposed to do. The first part is playing with fire. I think that comes from a situation that has existed actually forever, but much more critically in our times in this country. Yeah. Perhaps it's not so where you come from, but playing with words has been for a long time like playing with fire.
Yes.
You have to be very, very careful. So that's where that first bit comes from.
Yes.
As for...
Well, actually, I released a book called Playing with Fire. And like playing with words, it's all about, I suppose, playing with the unknown or the danger or that creative force. And like you said, if you're not careful, it can burn out of control.
Yes. But that you're talking aesthetically.
Yeah.
That you choose the right words, you toss them around to find the right word for the right place. Fire is something else. You know that books were burned.
Yeah. No. Here?
Well, yes, here also. But throughout history,
of course,
books have been burned because words are carriers of ideas. And ideas are dangerous. So for the dominant kind of thinking at any given point of time, the wrong words sends you to the fire. You're out. It has affected women more than men. Like throughout history, people have said, women shouldn't be allowed to read. Women should not be allowed to write. Words are dangerous.
Yeah.
They damage the body of women. They damage the spirit of women. Women become unsteady and unreliable in the sense that they leave those four walls and try and step out, and that's bad for them. So it's against this kind of background that one talks of words being like fire. They're dangerous.
Of course.
Having said that, let's come to more comfortable ground. Because
well, I'll just say before, on your point of it being dangerous for women to use words, it's such a relief to see that that's slowly changing in the space that I work. Some of them, a lot of the most powerful voices in the space that I write, social media poets and etc. All the most powerful voices are women. All the most well-received voices are women. So it's great to see the currents pushing the other way and women finally feeling free to be able to share their voices.
Out here also, at one time, journalism didn't admit women into that very sacred space called news. If women were on a newspaper, they were there to do stories on parenting, cooking, sewing, embroidery. That was their area. Gradually, then, and very forcefully now, women have just barged in. They are doing everything, and sometimes doing it better than men.
Yes, often.
More committedly, I think. So that settled, as I said, are you in the mood to joust? That's the other thing they expect us to do, because
we get along too well. We've been
you're characterized as the Insta poet, which means you belong to today. I am characterized as the classical writer, which puts me back some 300 years. Okay? So, but from that space, I really don't want to joust with you. I want to understand.
Yeah, well, that's
I want to understand what you're doing. So just tell me.
Well, to go on your point as well, I was most excited to speak with you because while we do come from such enormously different backgrounds and practice different crafts even, I have this sense that as we get through this discussion, we'll find a lot of common threads between us, that we come from the same space. But anyway, in terms of how I started.
Yeah. You spoke to me about passion.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, so talk about your passion for writing.
So I discovered my passion for writing in a roundabout kind of way. When I left school, I was 18. I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. That resulted in some pretty deep anxiety issues. And the psychologist that I was seeing at the time to help manage that suggested that I start journaling, expressing my thoughts and feelings to help focus those energies in a more productive way. I was an 18-year-old boy though, and journaling or writing poetry or anything of the sort didn't have much interest for me at the time, so instead I thought it would be a good idea to start a band. And so I built up a band around me, and for about 7 years I was songwriting. Every night I would go to sleep just visualizing the creative life I wanted coming into being and living the life that I wanted. And for 7 years I put every ounce of my energy into this dream of mine. Then a boy band called One Direction came out.
1 minute. What were you in the band? Were you a musician or you did vocals?
It was a kind of, what I did was I wrote the lyrics and the melodies, and my brother was the singer. So he was the one out front of the curtain. I was behind the curtain safely. Yeah, well, then a boy band called One Direction came out. No one wanted to listen to boys who wore skinny jeans and had long straightened hair and anymore. So that dream ended, and again I was in the same place. I was 26, I was living at home. I had no qualifications or idea of what I was going to do. And then I just decided I'd always wanted to release a book of my lyrics. Because this whole time with the band, it was always a collaborative effort. I was kind of hidden away in the back, and then that suited me fine. But in the same breath, I really wanted to release something of my own, and so I compiled a list of a compilation of all my lyrics that never made it into songs, and I released a book and put it online to sell. Because being in an independent band, I learned a lot about how to, take charge and release your own work and not depend on, record labels or publishers, just to get out there and do it yourself. So I put up a book online, and I remember I went out one evening. I thought I'll just put this book out, see how it goes, and I went out with my friends, and I came back the next day and I refreshed the page, and I had to take a second look at the sales. It turns out I sold about 400 copies in a night. I have no idea. 400. It's only, which isn't that many in the scheme of things, but at the time it was absolutely mind blowing. And then from then, well, the rest is history. I just kept on doing it, and then a few years later, once it all started. This whole writing thing started taking off, I reflected back on all those nights that I used to spend going to sleep at night, visualizing this dream and this life I wanted, because I was really disheartened when that didn't work out. I thought, wow, I've wasted 7 years of my life throwing my energy into something that nothing ultimately came of. But when I was reflecting back on it later, I realized that I actually did get everything I wanted. It just took a completely different form. So I would say to anyone really is not to give up on your dreams, because if you knock long and hard enough at the door, it swings open eventually. Maybe not in a way you expected, but sometimes you arrive at an even better place, and that's what happened with me, I suppose. So yeah.
So you went from lyrics to...
whatever it is that I do now.
To?
It's weird. I've always tried. I can't really classify what I do, because I guess I'm in the business of trying to express an idea in as clear and hopefully captivating a way as I can possibly manage. And due to the platforms I use to post my work, the fast-paced nature of them kind of dictates that I use poetic devices, because they're very beneficial in helping capture a person's attention quickly and helping an idea express itself in a brief amount of time, I suppose.
You know your stuff by heart? Do you know your poems by heart?
Yeah, a bunch of them, I guess.
One, please.
One piece. All right. The piece that has always rung most true to me. It's not my most well-written piece or anything, but I've always felt it applied to my own experience with my own life. Your body is not a temple. Temples can be destroyed and desecrated. Your body is a forest. Canopies of maple leaves and wildflowers growing in the underwood. You will grow back over and over, no matter how badly you were devastated. I think that's correct. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I can imagine how many people read this and responded, for instance, and what are the kinds of feelings that your readers expressed, let's say specifically about this piece of work? Where did it touch them?
Well, actually, to begin with, I just want to say, in relation to that, what a gift it is to be here, because the warmth and encouragement I receive from India is second only to the support I receive from my own home country in Australia. The emails that I get from India is the warmest, most polite, kindest, most encouraging. It's really clear to me that there is a really passionate love for the written word deeply sewn into the culture here. And I think that's something to be really proud of. But to answer your question, it's, gosh, all over the place, really. It's hard to pick. It's, yeah, that's a hard one to answer. There's so many different kinds of responses I receive, and it means completely different things from individual to individual that at this point I try and not even, I just kind of throw it out there into the wild and let people draw what they need to from it.
So I have to admit that coming from 300 years ago, I do not know what Instagram is. Look, I mean, I've seen ads in which a young woman walks into a restaurant and there's a lovely plate of food which I want to eat. She's not eating it.
She's taking a photo of it. Yeah.
So that's it. And then I wonder, okay, why is she doing that? She's sending it to some people, and these people are probably panting impatiently for this woman to send them a picture of what she's eating at that moment of time.
Well, on one level, that's completely what it is.
Okay.
The powerful thing about it, though, is it allows anyone on earth with a dream to pursue it.
Yeah.
And it cuts out you don't, in the case of writers, we don't need to rely on the faith or the personal tastes of a traditional publisher anymore. We can take our dream into our own hands and make something of it. It doesn't matter who you are, what you come from, it doesn't matter what you create, whether you're an entrepreneur or a creative, you can have a dream and you can manifest it with these tools, because at any given moment, the whole world rests right at our fingertips. And that's the positive, beautiful thing about it. It can be used in some pretty superficial, surface ways, but so can anything in the world. The important thing is that there are people out there who are using these spaces to add something meaningful to the world, and it's opening up some really incredible doors to people everywhere. So that's the special thing about it, I would say.
But I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
When I write, for instance, I do one draft, I put it aside. After a few days, I go back to it and I say, this is a load of rubbish. But I can salvage maybe one line, 2 lines, one idea from what I've written. So I salvage that and I work on it again. And I have my second draft. Having done that, suppose I have a publisher. Mm-hmm. I send it in. The publisher is the next filter. The publisher says to me, you know, all this is pretty good, but this isn't working. So see if you can do something about it. So back it comes, and back I go to work on it. And then maybe the 4th draft, the 5th draft gets published. Mm-hmm. Now, all these filters presumably are there to ensure the excellence of writing. Mm-hmm. Who are your filters?
So it's so interesting that you say that, because I've been thinking a lot about, I was thinking about it on the plane over here. The nature of the platforms that I use kind of does necessitate a little bit more of a raw, unfiltered work almost, which can respond really well with people, because it's just, sometimes I could have a moment of just absolute passionate creativity. Something comes out in 2 seconds, and 3 minutes later it's being posted to the world. And all those steps you're talking about have been removed entirely. And there are some benefits or positives to that, but also just on your psyche. If you were writing a story, I imagine that you would take months, painstaking months of putting something together, and as you said, you send it to an editor. They'd craft it even to a better space, and then only once all that's done, you have that moment where you release it to the world with all the apprehension and the nerves that I imagine comes with that. With what I do and other writers in my space have to do, we have to kind of feel that painstaking nerve every single day that we post it. And a few years of that can, if you're not careful, can really wear you down and affect you in a lasting kind of way. So you've got to keep an eye on it. I know that for the past, up until about 6 months ago, that really, I never had self-doubt with my work. And then about 1.5 years ago, it started really, really strongly. And I know it's because of that fast-paced nature of the world that we live in. I don't know how to manage that yet, but I'm working on it.
But I like to believe, because there's a huge amount of writing of all sorts going on in social media, in the entire space that has opened up. And I find that there are any number of people out there who have a very fine critical sense. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine if you wrote a poem and most people loved it, and then you wrote a second or a third, and someone in that crowd of 1,000, 3,000 said, hey, wait a moment, the standards are falling.
Yep.
I believe that there are people who have that sort of critical sense, and would such a person then say to you, hold on, something's happening here?
Do you know what? I kind of wish there was a little bit more. I kind of wish there was a bit more critique in the spaces that I'm on. To be honest, I actually don't. In terms of the comments of what people write and all that stuff, I think the critics stay silent, and I would probably appreciate a little bit more, maybe private criticism. Maybe they can contact me. Maybe not write it publicly on my posts, but maybe send me a private message letting me know, like, when things, because that's the thing about being a writer is your lens gets all blurry after a while. You don't know whether something's good or bad anymore, and the way of my work being judged is the amount of people clicking that little love heart on the post, and that becomes your way of understanding whether something's good or not, and that can have really harmful side effects. Sometimes I write something that I think is the best thing I've ever written, and the response to it will be terrible. And sometimes I write something that I think is absolute trash, and it goes nuts. And and we've got to keep an eye on, but we've got to keep. I don't know if we have to keep an eye on that, because if people are, I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet either. But it's definitely a part of it.
Right. Something you just said, in fact, is the big problem for all artists. You just said something that you think is very good, and your readers trash it.
Yeah.
And what you think isn't up to standards, they love. Okay. Now, the question arises, are you tempted to write the kind of stuff that obviously people love and lap up? Or will you continue writing what your heart dictates?
Okay. Well, this is something I've had this, let me see if I can explain this. An idea that I've been expanding on this year is this idea that in the heart of every single creative, there are two opposing selves. One is the artist, which is your raw, unguarded passion, I suppose. All of the artist's voice is very personal, and the artist is very protective and of its work. And then the other voice is the craftsman. The craftsman creates with the audience in mind. The craftsman looks for a space in the world for your art and fills it. And something that I've realized is that it's very important to strike a very careful balance between those two opposing forces. If you give the craftsman too much control, you end up with work that can be bland and soulless and too commercial or too watered down for the masses, that it touches no one in any significant way at all. Whereas if you give the artist voice too much power, you can end up creating work that is so attached to you or written so much from your own frame of being that people don't relate or respond to it. And then you risk growing resentful and bitter, and you're like, why is no one liking it? This work means so much to me, but no one's responding to it. And that can be really harmful too. So what you've always got to do as a creative is like strike a really careful balance between those two things. You want to be writing for the audience, but you want to be writing for you, because that's what creativity is. It's a discourse. It's a conversation between the creator and the observer. And it seems simple to say, but I think you can lose sight of that and lean too far in one of those two directions. I mean, if you're selling heaps of books because you're writing stuff that the audience is lapping up, but it's not meaning anything to you, it's tempting to go that direction. It's not sustainable. After a while, when you're not doing something with when something isn't matter to you, it could work for a couple of years, but before long, you're just going to be this shell, I suppose. And then the artist, gosh, if you stuck to the artist's voice too long, you'll go crazy, absolutely crazy. So yeah, that's something I've been playing around with this year.
You know, but forget about your readers. Many artists have friends whom they trust. Mm-hmm. Friends who have nothing to gain or lose. Perhaps lose your friendship if they're too honest with you, and if you're too prickly. But I, for instance, know of an artist who lived in a very small tenement, just 2 rooms, 1 front room, 1 kitchen. So he wasn't privileged enough to have a studio to himself. So when the rest of the family was sleeping in the front room, he would move to the kitchen and paint there. And in the morning, when his mother got up to boil milk and tea, she'd look at this painting and she'd say, "Not so good."
Sounds like my mum.
This corner requires something, I can't say what it is, but look at it again.
Yep.
And that mother was his finest first critic. Yep. And it's really worth having a mother like that or a close enough friend who does this for you.
It's absolutely necessary. And as you said that, I realized that it's probably something absent in my life at the moment. And I have a really beautiful group of friends who, a lot of them are writers and creatives, but as you were speaking, I realized that they don't really critique me as much as I need them to. They keep saying, "Oh, this is great, and it's not the whole truth, I know it.
There's a young dancer who came to me once, and she said, the review of my performance that your reviewer did was good, it was favorable, but I'm not happy. I want you to come and see and tell me honestly what you think." And it was wonderful to meet a young artist who wasn't full of herself, wasn't sure that she was the best dancer in the world. She was craving feedback that was honest.
Yep.
So a critic who can be trusted, I think, is an extremely important part of an artist's life. Yeah.
Absolutely integral. That's very true.
But something that, again, I'm a babe in the woods as far as all this Instagram, etc. are concerned. My impression is that Instagram is for photographs, stuff like that, visual.
Yes.
You are working with words.
That's exactly, yeah.
So how does that happen?
So when I first started writing, there were other platforms. I was using, you won't be familiar with any of them, but it was Tumblr and Facebook and stuff like that. And then Instagram was just starting to get popular, and I saw the photography on there, and I thought, how about we break up this a little bit with some words? I feel like people will get tired of just looking at people's salads and bodies all day. People will want to break that up with something, and so I started posting my work, and I thought I was being really original and unique about that. But of course, as soon as I started noticing that there were other writers from all across the world beginning to do the same thing. And I think the platform, people are spending probably too much of their lives on these platforms, but I think it's really helpful to have something meaningful in that space, and people are hungry for it as well. One of the coolest things about this experience is hearing from people who a very common kind of email or message I'll get is from people who say that they've never been interested in literature or the written word or poetry before, that that my book or another poet's book in that space is the first book that they've ever bought. And I think for a while these mediums had a bit of, maybe becoming a bit too pretentious maybe, or maybe the people it wasn't accessible enough to people. Whereas now, what's happening now, I think it's kind of reinvented that whole space and allowing people to feel themselves on something that they've always been hungry for, just haven't been able to access.
Yeah, no.
Sorry, that was me. Oh, was that you?
My question remains, so what you do is to write, that's type or whatever, separately.
Yep.
And then you take pictures?
I take a picture of the writing, and I post it like that. So it's just like, you'll see a white background with some writing on top of it, and then I'll write a little bit more down the bottom usually, but that's kind of basically how it works.
That's interesting. So I'm being marvelously educated, and I have to thank you for it. But despite having this very democratic platform, and I see the wonderfulness of democracy, and that it allows everyone to participate, that's marvelous. But I have a suspicion that you've published books.
Yes. Well, so for the first 5 years I self-published. Because, as I said, I started in a band, I've always been a little bit suspicious of anyone who wants to take 90% of your earnings. And also, with the whole world, as I said, at our fingertips, publishers, especially when you're first beginning, they're just not necessary. And it's kind of, it does a lot of good to put your own book together, get it printed, all on your own, design the cover. It's a really kind of empowering thing to do. In saying all that, I got published last year because I was going through a couple of years of self-doubt with my work, and then that happened, and I thought, cool, this is a good motivator to pick myself back up and reinvigorate myself. So I'm with a publisher now. It's hard to say what I'll do in the future, but I've forgotten what the question was.
I was trying to suggest that having this very democratic platform in which you have direct access to your reader, and therefore this thing called publisher in the middle it is not required, and then you publish.
Yep.
So I'm trying to see what the motivation was.
Yep.
Is there a question of permanence and impermanence?
Absolutely.
There is. You mean, no, I have another babe in the woods question. This stuff that goes onto Instagram, does it kind of fly off, or does it stay put?
That's interesting. I think it probably a mix between those two things. I think people hold on to it. Basically, I release everything that I post into books, though, so it can stay permanent. And the cool thing is that people are hungry to hold something and to still read it in the traditional way. The more years that pass, there was a time when I first started, it seemed crazy to release books. Everyone was like, this isn't going to work. But now, the more years that pass, the more optimistic I am about physically printed books. I think there'll always be a space for them in the world. I think people will always want something you can touch and hold, and people understand that it holds more significance when it's printed onto something physical than when it's just electronically blasted in your face through a bright screen.
So you do get a sense of permanence.
Yes.
It's very strange, because at one point, or even now, there was a kind of movement in the visual arts where people said art galleries are not democratic spaces, that only a few people dare to go in. They're intimidating, so most people are kept out, and therefore art itself becomes
stagnant,
that kind of
tyrannical,
hallowed and elitist object, etc. So we are not going to make art which is permanent. We are going to make art which can be assembled and then taken apart. But the funny thing is that people who had this very strong political stance would certainly assemble things and that sort of thing, and then they would take photographs. And they would put those photographs in catalogs. So posterity was not in the presence of something that was destroyed. They were in the presence of something that was permanent. Mm-hmm. So every artist, whatever his or her political stance, wants to reach posterity, not just the immediate readers.
Of course.
But does publishing, see, there's therefore, depending on the medium that you're using, there is surely a difference in how you approach words. How do you actually write for a book, and how do you write for this thing?
Well, those two things work hand in hand for me, I suppose. 75, 60, it's weird to talk about percentages, but a lot of my work is written for online, and then it usually makes it into my books either in an extended version or as it is later on. And then I'll also write specifically longer pieces specifically for the book that don't make it online. I'm promoting the last book by writing new work, and then that new work makes it into my next book. So it kind of just works like that.
Lovely. So I'm getting messages. 5 minutes. Yeah? Can they ask questions if they want to, please?
Hello. Hi. I just want to tell you that I found your story very inspiring.
Wow.
The setback that you went through and now you're here. I personally found it very inspiring. That's
wow.
All. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow. I kind of want to hang out with everyone who knows my work after this, if that's possible as well. That'd be really cool.
Okay, so hi.
Hello.
This is I'm very nauseous right now because I'm seeing you, because I've been...
I'm nervous too.
But I have a question for you, which is very important for me right now. Most of you, what writers write mostly comes from pain, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you overcome the insecurity of revealing yourself so much online?
That is an ongoing investigation for me. It is, I think, I almost feel like I'm approaching it again every single day, and every time the pain is slightly different, it requires a whole entirely new approach. One thing I am certain of is that while temporary pain, bitterness, guilt, anger or sadness can fuel creative work, when it's untended to too long, it can cause real damage to your creativity. And so I'm always trying to search myself for any deep pains, because in the past they've just completely left me stagnant creatively. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I have. That's what I have.
You said one is the craftsman and one is the artist, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when the artist overcomes you and you can't reveal so much about you, what do you do?
I think you just got to sit with yourself and always just look really carefully at where, this is a very vague answer, but you just got to think very carefully about what place you're writing from, and just try and get outside of yourself a little bit. I feel like a lot of us these days, we're so internal. We're always thinking about, you know, we're dealing with a lot of stuff, and we're just always inside ourselves. And sometimes we just got to extend ourselves outward, think about the people around us, and let all our issues will become a lot quieter when we do that. So that's why the craftsman is important. The voice that gets you out of yourself, stop looking in so much, and just take action a little bit.
Also, I said nauseous, so I'm sorry, I meant nervous.
Yeah, I'm heaps nervous.
Also, this is amazing.
Oh, wow, thank you. Wow, thank you.
I would love for you to sign it.
I 100% going to do that.
Can you do that after the show?
I'm doing it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.